Myron, are we still offline?
We're online.
Okay. All right, welcome to the Underground QA podcast, folks. A podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Ariel Smith. My pronouns are she, her. And we have a team of fellow QA professionals joining us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi there, I'm Myron. My pronouns are he, him. What's up, y'all?
Morning, everybody. My name is Chris, and my pronouns are he, him.
And last we have Nick. Nick, can you hear us?
Is this happening?
I think Nick might be having some technical issues.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
There we go.
I'm Nicholas Kotze. My pronouns are...
Oh, there's a delay.
Oh, there's a massive delay. Okay, gotcha.
There we go.
All right, guys. I have to drop out. This is terrible. All right. This is not working on my side.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll see if you can figure it out. Let us know, and
everybody's
we'll have you
breaking
jump back in.
I'll be back
In the
in a sec.
meantime, let's go ahead and dive in here. Okay, so today we are talking about test cases and what are they? Why do we have them? Why do we spend time writing them at all instead of just doing the testing itself? And what is the anatomy of a good test case? So hopefully this will be educational for folks who have never written test cases before and they want to learn how, or maybe you already write test cases and you just want to kind of beef up your skills there. Or you just want to hear a bunch of testers ramble on about how awesome QA is. So all of that is exactly what we're going to be doing here today. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. And I'm going to ask my fellow QA folks here to just tell me what are test cases, why are they necessary, and why do we spend time writing them instead of doing testing?
Ooh, that's a huge amount of stuff to dive in. So, like, what are test cases? I guess just in my mind, like the TLDR is just there are a bunch of prereqs, execution steps, and expected outcomes, like to use to validate and verify expected behavior of whatever product you're on. That's the way my brain looks at them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, and Chris, I think they're in agreement. To me, at the highest level, they're in agreement. What we believe is important to know, and the proof that we've actually got an answer to that question. So it's almost like going into an experiment with the research questions. You don't actually know the steps going in. Against when you get the sign off to get the capacity and the time and the resources to actually build test cases. It starts with a number of questions, a number of things that we need to know that we think are important enough to fund with the team and people and hours of their lives and etc.
Yeah, I actually used to have a manager who would, in interviews, he would ask potential candidates to go through the scientific method with him because he felt like testing was very much a process of using the scientific method. And in a way, test cases are like little experiments, right? Like you create a hypothesis about what you think might happen when you do a set of things, and then you run through those steps to see if you are in fact correct or incorrect. So it is kind of like going through the process of being a scientist, but you're specifically looking at a game or something, some element of a game to see if there's anything wrong with it.
Oh, I like that comparison. That's really cool. So that was something that they brought up during interviews to like.
Yeah, he would ask like a potential candidate, like, describe the scientific method for me. Okay, now how does that relate to testing? And it was interesting because you could see relatively inexperienced people start to like have it click in their head like right out of the gate. And so I think that test cases are important for the same reason that having, well documented science experiments are important, right? Like, you really want to make sure that you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's and following the correct procedures, because if you don't, then you might miss something important that causes, the validation to not validate the thing you're actually trying to validate. So, I think that writing test cases is important for the same reason that, documenting a science experiment is important. You're less likely to miss important things that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nicholas, are you back with us? Sounds like no.
Oh, oh no.
Okay, so you know, there is a certain extent to which some people will feel like, that maybe they are just, so good at ad hoc testing or exploratory testing that, they don't want to spend the time documenting and writing down test cases when they could just spend that time doing more testing. So what would you say to a tester who says, well, like, I don't need to do test cases. Like, test cases are for those other people who aren't as, talented and experienced as me, but I can just, jump in and wing it. And that way I don't have to spend all this time.
Yeah, like the artist, the creator. So like, that resonates with me a lot actually. Now I just started talking, and so by the end of this, I want to start off by saying that resonates with me a lot, so that when you get to the end of this, you're like, well, how did the person get from there to where he is now, or where they are now? I studied music in high school and actually in college. My undergrad was music composition, and so I love the aspect of how creative you can be. One of the things that drew me towards quality assurance is that the barriers for entry are low, but as we talked last time and previous episodes, the barriers to entry being low is a gift and a curse. But the thing that kept me in the quality was the fact that in general, all the other disciplines have a defined problem statement, something that they're solving for. And in quality, when you're focusing on testing, making sure the thing works, and seeing where it breaks and presents risk, that's a lot more creative, at least for a tester like me. You start with an undefined problem statement, and you get to focus on everything no one else is focusing on. And so that's like the art, and that's why that resonates with me. But it winds up being more than that. You can only get so far as an artist in testing.
So tell me more about like what you think the so you said that you think QA has an undefined goal there, right? Like, did I catch that?
Yeah.
Why do you think it is undefined?
I think it's undefined because, like, when you look at an average specification, it tells you what is supposed to work. And in some cases, if it's written really, really well, they'll write some failure conditions. But
Sure.
generally speaking, uh, everything else, like, you could probably get all of that done, like the happy path. And the happy path is even the defined failure conditions, by the way. But you can get the happy path done in maybe like 25% of your time. And then you have 75% of your capacity to find out what else is there. And so you actually have to create, you go to literature, like you leverage your experience, you leverage uh, the user persona, like what are the gamers or what are the people that are supposed to be using this, to identify the things that they may do wrong. So like you actually have an almost blank canvas to create your problem statements. Like your test plans or your test cases, are you saying, okay, um, I'm going to write my own problem statements, and like the testers um, get to determine most of that, and that's why I think it's undefined. Everyone else can go from the written specifications, that there are several practices of experts who write them and craft them for everyone else. We write our own.
So this is actually interesting. So one of the things that I find, or at least that I want to jump on to something you said in that last part there. about we write our own. Something I find incredibly useful about test cases is that um, the person who is writing them can write them for other people, right? Like a person who can write test cases can write a set of test cases that can be run by another tester or QA person, so that they have like a really good idea of explicitly what they're supposed to do. So you can have like experts on a project who know the feature really well, know what it's supposed to do, write really good test cases, and then can hand those test cases off to someone else who can run them. Um, so I think that test cases are actually a time saver in a way, because you can use them to save the time of the person who is writing them, so that that person can then focus on other things, and the actual running of all the test cases can be handed off to someone else who has the time to run through them.
That's a
Um,
great way to frame it. Absolutely
yeah,
love that way, because like allowing those people to take off, because you could say, oh, I'll just spend my time testing it, but then that means they're the ones spending the time going through doing those same tasks that just need to be run by somebody, when they should be digging into the real nitty gritty of the system that they know so well. That makes
yeah.
perfect sense. Yeah.
Right.
Because, like, you might have someone who is a great exploratory tester, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they know the feature they're testing in and out.
Yep.
And then they go on vacation, and you don't have that person anymore. You don't have their knowledge, so now
Mm-hmm.
someone has to fill in for them.
Yeah. Bus
Well, how
factor.
how do you do
Yeah.
that if there is no documentation or anything along the lines on how to test the things that they were testing? How do you replace someone who you know is just not there anymore, and there's no knowledge base to work from to do what the things that they're doing? Um, so yeah, I think test cases definitely reduce bus factor, which is the factor to which a company or project would be screwed over by someone getting hit by a bus.
Oh,
For
thank you.
those
Yeah.
who aren't familiar with the term bus
Definition.
factor, but yeah, the idea is, if someone was to be suddenly lost from a project, then how well would the team be able to cope with it? And if you don't have test cases, then the answer when it comes to losing test analysts is it might impact them pretty severely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when there's like really obvious gotchas that you might that frequently get missed when there's no documentation.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever had any of these, but there's always been like a couple of bugs that seem to happen at every release unless someone specifically tests that particular thing. And so like test cases are really good at catching those kind of frequent points of failure,
Mm-hmm.
because you basically have a checklist that you can go down. Like, imagine trying to do surgery without a checklist, right? Like, there would be so many things that could go wrong if you didn't have a
Yeah.
checklist of
Right.
all the things you're supposed to do. Like, oh no, I forgot to wash my hands, or oh, I forgot that tool I really needed. Like,
Like,
oh, I
whoops.
forgot to
Mhm.
sterilize my tools.
Forgot
Like,
the anesthesia.
I
Sorry,
forgot
dude.
the anesthesia. Like, so
Yeah.
many things can go wrong, and like
Yep.
the consequences of those things going wrong are dire. So it's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important to have a
Right.
checklist. So
I
yeah,
like
I,
how
I
you
think.
called it a checklist, Ariel.
Mm.
I'm sorry, I jumped in. Finish
No,
your
go
point,
ahead.
please. I love how you mentioned checklist, because I'll be honest with you, like the thing that got me from artist to to fledgling like test professional. This is before I discovered quality. Was someone handed me a checklist and they were like, "Hey, look, it's not a big thing. It's not an albatross. It's just a checklist. Like you have a checklist for getting out of your house in the morning. So just use these things. Just make sure that you write just like your name and the time that you did the test, and just write the file that you sent through the system. That's it. That's all we need to know. And if something breaks, just because we're all sitting together, just raise your hand and the lead will come over and check it out. And it started with just a checklist. And all of a sudden, the lead could have 5 people testing
Yeah.
instead of just the lead testing. Huh. Imagine that.
Yeah. I when I became a lead, one of the things that I quickly realized was that writing tests was a big time saver because I did not have to run the tests myself.
Yes.
I could hand them off to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I got my big brain on, and I was like, wait a second. But if I teach people how to write tests as well, how far down can this go?
Ooh,
Rico
delegation.
brain right there. Rico's brain right there.
I think it's also pretty good to point out that like with smaller QA teams, when you're like, I've had multiple projects where I've been literally the only person
Yeah.
on the project for QA and just as a whole. So writing out these test cases means you don't have to keep them stored in your big brain and
Yeah.
remember, oh, I need to go through this. Oh, I need to go through that. Wait, how did I test this last time to verify this functionality and make sure that this data validation was done correctly? Oh, that's right. Let me check my test cases that I wrote out so I don't have to just memorize everything about this. So it's like,
Yeah.
cool. I know how to run like the checklist. Honestly, it's weird because I've been trying to avoid using checklist. So I'm so glad that you two said that. It makes me feel a lot better because I
Well, I
always
mean,
go to like standardizations and like console search stuff.
I think there's also different kinds of test cases. There are totally test cases that aren't checklists, right? But like I think that is one of the things that they're very useful for. Is making a checklist, right?
Yeah.
Like you make a collection of test cases that you need to run on a build every time before you ship it out the door, and now you're less likely to miss the really important stuff. Yeah, and that's actually one of the interesting things that I find about like smoke tests or the last test that you run before the thing goes out the door.
Yep.
Those tests very rarely actually produce bugs that you wouldn't have caught by just jumping into the game and like playing for 15
And
minutes.
just messing around. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
But when they do, it is usually like an extremely important issue that you caught.
Exactly.
So I think that's one of the things that they do really well, and also it helps you be a little bit more efficient with your time. Like I try to arrange my test cases and my test suites to flow kind of naturally from one into the next. So that I find that by having this like pre set list of test cases and pre-organized list of test cases, I will test all the things that I need to do actually more efficiently than I would if I was just trying to ad hoc YOLO into it and just remember from a brain what I was supposed to look at. It's kind of like the difference between having a grocery list and going through the grocery aisles in order, as opposed to wandering around the grocery store grabbing one thing at a time. Like you go over here and then you go over here and then you go over here. Like I like to have a test case that is going to sort by aisle, right? And then I know that I can go through the grocery store once and I'm not going to have to bounce around a whole bunch.
Exactly. And this kind of that's a great analogy to use when you start getting, I know this is really jumping ahead, but when you start doing like molecular test cases where you have your single step, like big setup all the way over to here. Here's what you're testing. Here's the expected result. It's you're having to redo all these setups because like, oh, I'm going to test this part of the front end UI, but then I'm actually going to go over here and do some in-game kind of stuff. And then I'm going to go back to the front end UI. I have to do those setups again. Why not just have everything organized and ready to go? Why don't you just walk through the produce and then go down the cereal aisle and then back up the chips and salsa aisle, that kind of stuff.
Right. I love the analogy of the grocery store.
It's excellent.
Again, I'm more of the artist tester at heart. So at the grocery store, I'm the chaotic person where at the checkout, I realize that I have 3 jars of pickles and I don't know how they got there. But also, right, like I'll admit that it allows me to sneak candy into my shopping cart, like unaware, unbeknownst to my wife, who is currently like getting into summer shape because like the plague is like almost over. But like,
I can't wait to see where this analogy is going.
This is great.
So I started off with it being an agreement, right? So like now, one of the things that my wife does to make sure that she keeps us on track is she writes a shopping list, a checklist of the things that we need, and makes sure that before we go in, we can keep the energy from the Myron resource, the Myron person who's on the team, focused, so that instead of it taking us an hour to 2 hours to get through the shopping, it takes us about 20 minutes
Yeah.
when we're organized. Interesting.
Yeah.
You're kind of swinging me on this whole test case thing, actually.
I mean, I think that I tend to get the best results when I do a mix of both, right? Like if you have like a really efficiently written test suite, right? You can spend 20 minutes running through that, say like in the grocery example, right? Like if you only want to spend an hour at the grocery store, right? You run through your checklist, you knock it out in 20, 30 minutes, and then you have an extra half hour to, whatever, and wander around, maybe go taste some samples, stop by the bakery and get yourself something special. Like there's this extra time that you have to play with to do other things like exploratory testing, right? Because first you got the important stuff knocked out of the way, and now you have a little bit of extra space for dessert or whatever.
Snack.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so I feel like we did a pretty good job of talking about like why test cases, right? Like they're time savers, they lower bust factor, they keep you organized, they make sure that you don't miss anything really important, right?
Yeah.
At least
they eliminate snacks in the shopping cart as well.
and they eliminate snacks in the shopping cart. Yeah.
We have
so let's talk about what kinds of test cases are there and what are their purpose. So do either of you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah. And I'll start, of course, with an anecdote. I started at a company. It was a startup, and they were doing a financial product. But I started in the company, and the company was like, "Yo, so like we're agile, right? Remember during the interview, yeah. So we do 1 week sprints." I was like, "Okay, all right." And so like yesterday you started, and today it's Tuesday, and like the release is Friday. So do quality. And so the first thing, right?
The quality, please.
Right? Do quality.
I'll have one quality.
And so I immediately crashed the board with a bunch of boundary tests and broke a bunch of shit. And Thursday, I submitted all the bugs. I mean, it was like 20 or 30 bugs. And I was like, yes, my first week, I'm killing it. And the product manager said, I don't give a shit about these bugs, man. Like, no one's going to do this stuff.
Cool.
That's so abrasive.
Why did you do it then?
Like,
what was it for?
Thanks for wasting my time.
Exactly. And that's a great question. I think one of the really important pieces, thinking about testing, particularly if you're on a team or a new team or your company's new to quality, I think it's really important to understand why you're writing the test cases and like what quality means to the company that has hired you or who has given you some spare time out of your normal job. Let's be honest, it happens to quote do quality. And we talked about a few in the pre-show or the planning session. We talked about a few different sort of reasons that an organization is willing to pay for testing.
Yeah. So like, some of the test cases that we had talked, or the kinds of test cases that we had talked about were like compliance test cases, functional test cases, non-functional test cases. So let's kind of dive into what some of those are, and what are we using them for? What are we trying to get out of running those various test cases?
So like your functional test cases, like those are the test cases that you're putting together in order to kind of verify and evaluate the functions that the system should perform. Like when I use this weapon in a game, it should do this, it should make this sound, it should cause this much damage, it shouldn't do the following. That's functional.
Yeah.
Pretty
make sure it does this or it doesn't do this when you do things, right?
Yep. Right. When you use the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
When you land from like let's say you have a superhero that can't die from jumping off of a building.
Mm-hmm.
When you land from a building this high, it should feel like this. When you land from a building this high, it should just feel right. Like like that movie where the superhero lands with the knee, it should feel right.
Mm-hmm.
Non-functional.
Oh, so there's
Non-functional.
your non-functional.
Yeah, it should feel right.
Oh, I see
Ooh,
what you're saying.
yeah. It's
Okay.
like how well does the system
Yeah,
work?
does it
Yeah.
feel right? So there's a
Mm-hmm.
combination of like rumble pack and adaptive controller and sound, but like, does it feel right? And that's similar to performance testing in non-games.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Does it feel good when you go in there? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, that's non-functional. Like, what is it? What does feel good look like? Well, it should feel like in this game when the God of War, Kratos, I forget his name. Like when he lands after like killing the boss, it should feel like that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that's non-functional, but I know what that feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll say it's ready when it feels epic.
Yeah. Like,
Like that qualitative feedback. They're like,
Yeah,
how
the
good is
qualitative
this?
shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah. And
That's
I
sorry.
think there are a lot of kinds of test cases that fall under the non-functional like umbrella because they're more about like taking measurements than pass fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Mm-hmm.
think performance testing would fall under not
Yeah.
non-functional
Yeah.
test
Absolutely.
testing
Yeah.
because you are not you're not necessarily making sure that it is doing a specific thing,
Mm-hmm.
but you are trying to gather data on how it is performing, right?
Exactly.
Um,
A good example, like an example that I have from my own, like early in my career is I used to work on music games and beat matching, and it was a lot of beat match level design. I've done a ton of that type of QA and actual like design work. So a lot of my early stuff was testing. I worked on Rock Band for a significant amount of time, all different flavors. And what I would do is the qualitative and like in this context, non-functional testing of the authoring. I would actually go in and look at to see like, does this feel like specifically drums? Does this feel like you're playing it on the actual drum kit, and does it translate well into these 4 pads and a little foot pedal? Like
yeah,
that was a significant amount of my work, was giving that qualitative feedback, being like, hey, if you put these 2 gems together in this order, it doesn't feel like what the drummer's actually playing, especially in like expert mode. Here's my suggestion of how to put it back. And then the designers that were putting together those levels and the authoring there would then like we talk back and forth about redoing that. So in my mind, like when I think of non-functional testing, it's not only like you mentioned, Ariel, with like performance, be like gathering that data, but it's also like giving that kind of feedback.
hmm
Right. And
yeah,
non-functional tests can drive or be like a part of like in a package with functional tests as well. So like
Mm-hmm.
if you say this doesn't feel right and the specifications for the gems change, then there's functional tests to make sure that they're in the right spot so that
Mm-hmm.
it's reproducible to
Exactly.
get the non-functional effect later on.
Exactly. It's like, does the gem show up where it's supposed to? Yes. If you hit the pad and you trigger where the gem is, do you get points? Yes. If you miss the gem, do you not get points? Does it go down? Does the art look the way it's supposed to? Yes. There's your functional testing.
Yeah.
yeah.
Go for it, Ariel. Sorry about that.
I was going to say exactly what you were going to say. You can totally mix non-functional and functional test
Mm-hmm.
cases in the same test suite, right?
Yeah.
Like we, at some of my companies, we would have templates for specific kinds of tests that we would run. Like you might say, have a template for running a test on a new character class because
Mm-hmm.
probably going to do that, a few times. So there's no point in throwing that whole test out every time.
Mm.
But tests like that could have like make sure the class works and does all the things it's supposed to do, and make sure you test all the skills and all that stuff. But also, how does it feel? Right, like make sure that it feels balanced with other classes. Make sure that it is fun, right? Like
Mm.
that's
Ooh,
not like
find
a
the fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's not like a
Yeah.
pass fail thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't say check is fun, right? Fail is not fun, right? Like
Right.
that is qualitative feedback, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also like really important, and you don't want to like skip that step, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think that things like that are good to include in in a set of test cases for something along those lines.
Yeah.
And
Especially
similarly, I include it in I'll include like feedback like that in a report, right? Like let's say you're creating a test report for a feature you just tested. I have templates for that and stuff too. So obviously you'll want to like list all of the bugs, but I also like a part of my test report template is well, what did you think? What's like your qualitative feedback? Is it fun? Did it feel good? Is uh does the UI flow well for you? Like, do you feel like frustrated when you're trying to use this feature or anything like
Yeah.
that?
And that really ties nicely into the fact that QA, we're the advocate for the end user, we're an advocate for the player. So we have that type of viewpoint for the entire product as a whole, like holistically
Yeah.
across the board, to be able to give that to the rest of our teams.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to mention something Punch Party X Punch Party X said. And you're talking about like test cases and coverage. So I would say like functional tests, are often the ones that you're looking at how much coverage you have for the things that we've built. But like also that coverage, you can actually determine from those functional tests what areas of the system you want to actually like pay for more coverage to be in. So for games like a lot of first person shooters are like over the shoulder, destructible environments, and so because that was so popular, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when games were just doing it, every game was like third person, over the shoulder, destructible environments. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so you might spend a lot more money to make sure that those keystone features, the features that show up in marketing, are working.
Sure.
The key differentiators. So those
Yeah.
are really important point X party. I'm sorry, X point X punch party X.
Yeah, like I have found that there's a few different things. Like I think this is actually a whole topic in and of itself, but like there's a few different reasons why you might prioritize different kinds of test cases over others, or even sunset certain test cases if they're maybe not producing useful bugs, or that feature is no longer a feature that we particularly care about, right? Like there was one feature on a project I was on that less than 1% of the users ever touched at all, and it was one of the most time consuming things to test. So we really had to like take a hard look at our test cases for that feature, because we didn't want to stop testing it completely, right? Like it was important to us that it still worked on a very basic level, but it became much less risky to the product overall if that feature were to break, and it was like started becoming no longer worth the time to spend on testing it.
Yep.
So we took a hard look at our test cases, and we were like, all right, how can we slim these down as much as possible so that we're making sure that yes, it is still working, but we're not spending too much time on it. And that's the thing that changes over time, right? Like you constantly have to be looking back at your test suites to make sure that they're not getting too bloated, and you're not spending too much time testing things that actually don't matter, because that is something that is, I think, super common mistake to make with test cases, is to just keep adding more and more and more and more to tests until they become so bloated that you don't have that extra time that I was talking about to do the exploratory testing, right? Like if every time Myron and his wife go to the store, they add another like thing that they need to, like another aisle. Actually, here's a better way to think of it. Every time you went to the store had added another aisle for you to look through, right? And so now it just took you more time to get through, because it was the store itself was getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yep.
Right? How do you make sure that you're still only spending that 20 minutes that you want to spend to knock out your checklist, so that you have that extra time to meander around the store and look for the candy?
Yeah, that's a hard conundrum.
And this also kind of I don't mean how do we, damn it, Mike. That's fair. Come like Easter time and there's like mini eggs everywhere. I deal with that same thing. So this kind of like, I know this is slightly going back, but with why you need to be writing these test cases, because you have that history of where the product has been in areas
Mhm.
that you've checked and where things have been problematic. And then
Yeah.
as you realize, oh, I don't need these tests, you pull them out. And then you can start saying like, all right, did we actually not need these tests? Did we remove the wrong test? Do we need to pull these out of cold storage and put them actually back in the suite and take these others out? So that can actually help with like, this is why you write all this stuff down, why you keep it when you like deprecate tests out or sunset. I really like sunset. That's
Yeah.
nice because the sun will still rise and can come
Yeah.
back. But yeah, that, I'm sorry, I just had like that brain connection there. It's like, that's another reason why you need to write this stuff down, why you have to have your test cases plotted out.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, cool. So let's talk about the anatomy of a test case. So what is a test case actually made up of? Like this, because this kind of leads in from the thing that you were talking about, which was, to a certain extent, traceability, right? Being able
Mm-hmm.
to look back at your tests and see
Thank
which of
you.
these test cases are producing bugs.
I appreciate that.
Um,
I'm bad at vocabulary, so thank you.
yeah. So what goes into a test case, and obviously there's a variety of different kinds of test cases, and some of them have a lot of different components to them. Some of them are very
Hmm.
simple. So let's talk a little bit about all the potential things that could make up a test case.
Do
Well,
we
I
want to
think.
talk about like bones, like the real like little structure, or like
Yeah, let's talk about the bones.
the more? Okay, cool.
Well,
Go
can
ahead,
we
Myron.
start with like one organization's like official definition and then like unpack it and
Sure.
like
Ooh.
get to
Yeah.
so we captured this ISTQB's definition of a test case, and that's a set of input values, execution preconditions, expected results, and execution postconditions developed for a particular objective or test conditions, such as to exercise a particular program path or to verify compliance with a specific requirement. And so now we'll go off script and like explain what that stuff
Yeah. Um,
means.
so I think that in a lot of ways, many test cases share some of the same um, bones of a bug report, and because a bug report has a list of steps that you run. It has expected results. It also has preconditions, right? Like make sure the game is running, make sure you have a character that can do this. Like there's all these things that you need to do before you run a test case.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so in many ways, I think that test cases can look very similar to a bug report, with the difference being the bug report will say, "And by the way, this failed."
Right.
um, Whereas the test case, it doesn't know, right? Like it's ambivalent
Mm-hmm.
about whether or not the thing has failed until it's
Mm-hmm.
actually been run.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. It's like it failed here. This is what failed. This is the degree to which it failed. Uh, Here's what I think the severity is of it. We can have some uh, pre pre agreed upon sort of like quality bars for what severity
Buzzword.
means. So like, is it just breaking one piece or one object, or does the entire game crash? Does it
Yeah.
block everything else? Those are things that go into that. But you're absolutely right, Ariel. Like, if you write your test cases based on what you're trying to do, your test case could easily be, hey, here goes the repro steps, like right there. And I'm just going to talk to you primarily about what I think the impact is based on my understanding of the system. I think tests written well or good enough also allow the team to learn more about the system as well, because we're talking
Hmm.
about behavior here
Mm.
of the component or the system that you're verifying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's actually funny because one of my favorite things to have a new tester do is to run through, a kind of broad test of some kind that covers the whole game, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
a BBT, a smoke test, or what have you. Something that it will take them a long time to get through. And one of the reasons why I like to have them do that is it acts as kind of like a tour of the title, right? Like it takes them through all of the different features of a title and touches on each of them briefly. And because the test case will have expected results, like when you do this, it should do this. It is, in fact, a document that describes how the game is supposed to work. Um, so sometimes those tests can work almost kind of sort of like a design doc, um, in the sense that it is a list of the things that the game is supposed to do and how the game is supposed to work. But I have found that one of the most useful ways to have a tester like get to know a game is to not just have them play it, right? Having them play it is good too,
Yeah.
but even better, have them run through something like a smoke test. That will touch on all the features in the game so that they can see everything that the game has to offer. They won't miss anything because you have like in theory with this test, every piece of the game is represented in it. Um, Whereas if they just played the game, maybe they just don't engage with some of that content. Maybe some of it's end game content, so they're not going to get there if they're just playing naturally. Maybe some of it's multiplayer content. If they're playing by themselves, they're not going to be able to. They're not going to experiment with that at all. But if they're running a test, they might say, "Hey, I need someone to help me with this multiplayer testing. Can someone jump in and do that with me?"
I think doing it that way is also a great litmus test just for the rest of the QA organization to see if they're actually writing their test cases properly. So that way, someone brand new, zero experience, which is a big thing for me when I tell my analysts, like, here's how I want you to be writing your test cases. It's like someone who doesn't really know what to do can look at the test case, run the steps, and be able to perform it properly without having to ask too many questions regarding normal onboarding stuff. But I think it's great to say like, oh, this test case was confusing. I wasn't sure about this. It sent me to this test documentation that has that I need to have a lot of assumed knowledge in order to really run this test.
I don't know if there are any live QA folks in watching or listening right now, but if you've ever pulled like a late night trying to run a smoke test on something that's about to go out the door, I don't know about you, but I've done that, and I've had maybe producers or a programmer just hanging out waiting to see if anything goes wrong, but they're not actually doing anything. So I'll be like, "Hey, you, come here, come help us run this test, right? Don't worry, my test was written. Anyone can run this test, right? Like, so get over here. These are your test cases. Go run them." And most of the time they're happy to help because they want to get out of there too, right?
Right. Yeah.
And if they're just waiting around for us to finish it, yeah, you might as well have them jump in.
Right.
So having those test cases written in a way that is makes it easy so anyone can run them is I think the best way to write them too. Because again, like when going back to the bus factor thing, if you have a test analyst who does write test cases, but all of them are for them, right? Like
That's real.
This is a test case that only I can understand. It would look like complete nonsense to anyone. Like, okay, well, you've at least done the checklist part. Like you've gotten the benefit of having the checklist from the test case, but you haven't gotten the benefit of being able to hand it off to someone because it is so specifically written for a very specific audience.
Exactly. Go ahead, Myron.
I was gonna say, like, have you ever been to an artist's workspace?
Oh, I love that you go to this analogy. It's so good.
And so I will admit that the average bear may not be able to run Myron's tests, and that's a problem because Myron also likes regular naps and vacations, and so writing tests, like going that extra mile and explaining to the rest of the organization that can help into the testing really helps Myron out, even though he would rather have paint spilled everywhere, all the toys on the table in like a small little space with a controller or a keyboard to like do testing. That doesn't necessarily lead to being able to get things done quicker, efficiently, and maximizing the time. And again, I do enjoy naps, so that's what gets me. That's what moves me forward into some of the things that like Ariel was talking about. And I'm introducing the thought about strengths. There are a million strategies to write tests, and it's really important that you identify the strategies that you're most successful at using, and the strategies that are really satisfying for you to use. Because there's different types of tests that we talked about earlier. There's functional, there's non-functional, there's compliance based, there's different methods of doing it, like actually executing tests that are structured in a particular way, or based on a definition, or doing exploratory tests. So there's a million different ways to do it, but it's really important to take from this conversation like the reasons why these things are important, and then look into the literature later on to find out which ones you're going to put in or bring into your workplace.
Yeah.
So good. So good. We should keep using like artists and musicians as examples because we're all a mess. Big messy prima donnas.
So I feel like we could go over each of the individual components of a test case, right? Like the objective, the preconditions, steps and trigger, expected result, post conditions. That's one of the lists I have written ahead of time. But I feel like there might be other less obvious components of a test case that are worth talking about. Like, for example, traceability, right? One of the things that is extremely useful about a tool like TestRail, and hopefully we can get into some, a later episode, we can talk about some test management software and why we use that. But one of the nice things about test cases in something like TestRail is that there's this idea of traceability, which is it will tell you all of the bugs that test case has already found, right? Like in previous versions. Or alternatively, you can look at a bug and then trace back to see what test case found that bug. And that can help you identify which test cases are actually useful because they produce meaningful failures. So that's one of my kind of favorite, less obvious components of a test case. Is there anything, are there any components of a test case that you two feel like are maybe not so obviously important but do have some use?
I think it's being concise. This is more of just like a best practices kind of thing, but it's more, it could be, I can see how being concise could be taken as like just be as quick as you can, just get right to the point, say what you're talking about.
Be quick and dirty, right?
Quick and dirty, bam, 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 it's this. But then you end up getting into the area where you have the person who owns the space is writing test cases for themselves instead of someone else coming in. But it's like being concise also means being very clear and saying, all right, you're going to need this platform. You're going to need to set it up with this kind of setup. It has to be connected to this part of the network. You have to do all of these things. In addition to that, that can like adding all of those things can make a test case itself become extremely bloated. So being able to have accessible testing and clearly written testing documentation to couple with that. So you're like, all right, we want you to set up the device using these parameters. Go to this part of this document. So you go to the document and there you go. It's like, all right, cool. Here's how you set up your Android device to have this, and what you need and everything and how to install the build correctly. Cool.
Yeah.
Here's the next step. So those kind of things of like being very clear, being very concise, and also like having references to test cases so you don't make your test cases massive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. As an artist, I think one of the little known things about tests is that they can be used as a really good aspect of a learning organization. So interns coming in from any field can participate, but I like to write tests in a way that are narrative form. I use Gherkin language, so that the tests ideally are written before the coding even begins, and they're catalysts for people learning or getting some understanding, getting some gut feel for how the application is, how the experience is put together. So this call, this action, this jump, this blah blah blah, what systems are involved? And so a test case a test case written well, written tersely, written clearly, can give your entire team, like, and I mean everyone on the team, uh, an understanding of what's happening when the application is running.
I just want to point out that though Nick couldn't join us due to technical difficulties, unfortunately, he's writing some excellent additions to this topic in the Twitch chat.
Yeah.
Regarding text things that make a test case very valuable, like defects
Yeah.
found, which we hit. Let's see, minimizing tech support costs. Verify require. Let's see, am I reading this in the correct order? No, I'm not. Anyways, what Nick is writing is excellent. We can post that somewhere on our Twitter.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
says
like
that some of the
user
fields that make a
training.
test case useful: versioning, status, result,
Mhm.
priority, traceability to design, requirements, bugs, author, tester, date last updated, build executed against. Yeah, date last updated is a great one, right? Like, how
Yes.
old is this test case? Has it like been updated since this feature has been updated? Um, sometimes I will find that testers, like, as they're running through maybe an older a test case that I've written, that they might tell me like, hey, the feature doesn't actually work this way anymore. um, and so, like, sometimes, if you're looking at like, when was this test case last updated, you can see like, oh yeah, the reason why this test case exists still is because it was written before this feature was last changed. Um,
Right.
I think priority is another really useful like component of a test case, because sometimes, like, I like to write tests that have varying levels of depth. So one of the things that I tend to do is I will write 3 tests in one, and then I will set different priorities for all of the test cases in it. So I might have, like, if you're talking about like a very kind of high level cover the whole game type test, you might have a very abbreviated version of that test that covers just the basics, and that is maybe your smoke test. And then you have a much larger version of it that maybe you call that a PBT or something. Um, and so what I can do is I can set up my test suite so that all of these test cases still flow naturally from one into the next, like I like to do, because I want to make sure that they're run quickly and efficiently, right? Um, and I can still do that, but then I can, determine whether or not we need to run just the high priority test cases or the low priority test cases, depending on, how frequent, like, when was the last time we ran all of the low priority ones, how much time do we have, because maybe we have days, maybe we have an hour. And sometimes, like, maybe there are, like, normally I would run the entire test, like all of the medium and low priority test cases, but we only have an hour. So, whether or not I want to do all that stuff or not, don't have the time. Only have the time to do the very sorry about hitting my mic there.
Do it all the time. We'll fix it in post.
So maybe we only have the time to run the really, really high priority stuff because we got to get this hot fix out the door.
Yeah.
So priority is really useful for that, because you can filter out all of the medium and low priority test cases and just stick with the high priority ones.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, I think is really important, and I'll make a comment about something that Nicholas said in the chat. Um, as you're hearing us talk today in this conversation, you're probably getting the sense that, wow, these are 3 professionals that are fairly successful in the field, but, like, I get the sense that they do things very differently. It's really important for you to know that that's okay. I really think it's okay for you to know it's okay. Now, from a prioritization perspective, this feature has to go out in an hour. Like, this, everyone is waiting for this thing to happen. It's almost midnight. Like, we can't do like the company that recently did that, where it was like midnight, but actually in your time zone, actually blah blah blah. Anyway, one of the things that Nicholas said was competition. I've actually used a March Madness style bracket to narrow down the things that we were going to track for. Like sitting in the room, the brackets are up. architect, developers, other testers, go. What's more important? And then we got down to the final 8 right away and like spread to the winds and tested it.
Yeah.
So competitions, Nicholas, that's awesome. That's a pro tip right there.
Yeah. Sometimes another thing you can do is you can, if you have like a test broken up into various sections, right, and you have like different levels of priority for all the test cases in each section, you can say like, hey, it's this particular area of the game was changed, so we actually want to run all of the test cases in that section, but then only touch the high priority stuff in the other section. So what you're talking about there, Myron, you might say like, all right, now obviously we're going to do all the high priority stuff for all of the stuff on this board, right? We can't skip the high priority stuff, but we do have this, extra 40 minutes that we can spend on the medium and low priority stuff on some of it. So which areas of the game do we want to touch with that time, right? Generally speaking, I want to touch the stuff that has been changed recently because it's the riskiest part of the game. Or maybe it's, you want to, no, that's usually what drives me is to just look at what's been touched, what's most likely to break.
Yeah. Who's kind of YOLO'd something into a feature? We got to check that area again. We need to like make sure that what we expect has happened and like some real service level integrations, because that stuff's scary.
Yeah, or what areas of the game might be impacted by some of these changes? Like they weren't changed themselves, but they are related and they connect in some way, so it's possible that they were affected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like one of the things that you mentioned earlier, Ariel, was like writing tests for other people on the team, and that's a really important aspect of it, particularly as we're using a lot more agile teams and like everyone owns everything.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, if it's March and you're in like the Midwest and you need a way to get people motivated and really excited about being a part of the testing process, a March Madness style bracket can work. And so there are ways, there's like methods. So like you understand what you're trying to do, but there are a million tools and strategies to get what you need to prioritize the test, to include the entire team in the prioritization so that as a team, when there are problems, mistakes were made and we're working through it versus, well, Ariel, the manager, made all the decisions, so I just get to grumble about having to work a few extra hours on Friday. So like if you do it as a team, like you have a much better outcomes generally.
Yeah, I have also found that so a lot of us work with outsourced testing groups now. It's pretty common, and some of them are in different time zones. So when you give them a test, you might not be online to answer their questions about that test, right? So you don't want to come back in the morning and find out that they couldn't do the test that you wanted them to do, or they did the entire thing incorrectly because the instructions weren't explicit enough.
Yes.
So, when you're working with outsourced groups in particular, especially if they're in a different time zone, it becomes really important to make sure that your tests are really, really clear so that you can confidently give them the test and know that this will be run correctly and I don't have to worry about them getting blocked because they didn't understand it.
And also like it goes into other things that were mentioned in Nick's amazing lists of what make a good test case, is like labeling these correctly for, especially if you have external resources working on stuff. They might not even have access to the correct like environments or tools that are needed to run some of these tests that maybe an internal resource would. So you could sit there and be like, hey, here's a big block of tests. Can you just kind of grab them and go and be like, hey, everybody in the other time zone, you can take care of this and I'll see you in the morning. And when I get up in the morning, realize, hey, we couldn't run half of these because we literally don't have access to what we need to run these tests.
Yeah.
Bad times feels bad.
It really does.
Cool. Well, so I think we touched on pretty much everything that we wanted to touch on here. Um, I think there's a lot of things that we could go into in a future episode. So one of the things that we talked about in our planning meeting was maybe having an episode on test management software, and how those can be useful and tricks and tips for those. So maybe we can do that in a future episode.
We could also
Um,
go into more of like the real nitty gritty of what makes different types of test cases.
mhm.
Like we hit the kind of like, oh, an objective and preconditions and steps and triggers, but like there are different ways to set those up based on how you want to run your test suite.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, if you have some thoughts or ideas on what kinds of discussion you would like to see around test cases and test case management in the future, like definitely let us know, either on social media or on our Discord or wherever. We're absolutely listening, and we want to help people where they're looking for help. So instead of a bug of the day, we wanted to talk about this video that someone made on Twitter. Their name is Alan Ruskin, or at Despair, and they basically made a. There was this video that someone posted of all of the. It was a Verizon 5G network commercial or something that had a bunch of bugs in it, like built into the video. I'm gonna put the link in the Twitch channel here, and so what Elon Ruskin did is he wrote every single bug in the video. Like he wrote an actual bug report for all of them and tweeted every single bug report. So if you go to that link, you can watch the video that he watched and went through.
He put in assignees.
Oh, did he? Yeah, assigning to gameplay, assigning to environment art, reassign to gameplay if it's a component issue, assign to rigging. They might need to reassign to gameplay. Like this is great.
Shoot, that's brilliant.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend checking this out. It's really really juicy stuff. So thanks again, Aelon Ruskin for writing that up. It was pretty good.
This is wonderful. Assigned to environment art, maybe project. Reassigned to gameplay if it's a component issue.
Yeah. It's really good. He said he omitted repro steps because of the 280 character limit. So he had to omit repro steps for brevity. But I think he is. It's fine that he did that, given how much effort he put into this. And like the best part is like each tweet has like a little clip that he snapped of the particular bug that he was writing. So actually, I think that like this might even kind of give people an idea, specifically the fact that Elon included the assigned to section. This might even like give people an idea of like who actually is responsible for fixing these kinds of bugs. Which normally QA doesn't actually, or QA testers, individual testers don't actually assign bugs, and at least on the projects I've been on. But it can be useful to know who a bug is potentially going to go to.
This is excellent.
Yeah. Anyway, I love this. I think this is really great. Definitely check it out if you haven't seen it already. It's a really really fun thing.
That's so good.
Dare I say, a work of art?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so that does it for us today, folks. I want to thank both Chris and Myron for joining us, and Nick. Really sorry that you had some technical difficulties. We'll definitely have to bring you on for another episode again. We really wanted to have you on, but sometimes it's just the way it works out. So we'll try and get you on for a future episode for sure. Because I feel like we missed out on your insight today.
Agreed.
I'd also like to thank our audience for listening. We really wouldn't be doing this podcast without you. If you have any suggestions for future topics or bugs of the day, we'd love to hear them. And again, in particular, if you have any thoughts on what more could we have talked about as far as test cases and test management go, let us know there, because maybe we missed a huge subsection of topics that we could go into in the future. Also, if you're a QA professional and would like to be on the podcast, we would love to have you. I genuinely want to stress that we love to have more people, a variety of opinions to come on and talk with us. I would be more than happy to replace every single one of us on here with a guest speaker for an episode. That would be super fun. So really, don't be afraid to reach out. You don't have to be a QA speaker or anything like that. You just have to be a QA professional who loves talking about testing, and we can bring you on.
Mm-hmm.
In either case, please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf, CONF, @gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter at undergroundqa, because we'd love to hear from you and collaborate. Do either of you have anything to plug today?
Oh, go on, Chris.
I would say that if you are able to, where you live, I'm going to strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, please get vaccinated. And also consider still wearing a mask in more crowded spaces.
Yeah, plus 3 million.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have anything to plug, so I think that is going to be it for us today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Keep playing, keep testing, and keep washing your hands.
And here goes the music.
This is such a jam.
I know, right? I want to know what the lyrics are.
Myron, want to do a video collab and cover this?
That would be awesome.